We have physical audience, and then we have you who has graciously agreed to join the link that we sent. So, asante sana. We are broadcasting from Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Lucy Wanjiko Otula. I work for Wildlife Protection as the head of communications. And I will be your moderator for this event in conjunction and in collaboration with my friend and colleague, Dr. Patrick Mwinde, who did the introduction earlier on. Today I want us to start with something unusual. As we know, in 2002, the Kenyan country ushered in a new president in 2002. And for the next 10 years, President Emilio Kibaki would rule with a lot of honor and dignity, changing our lives for the good, and also changing our planet and changing the way animals and people live. Today, our President Kibaki lies, his body lies instead at Parliament buildings. And I know most of you wanted to go and see him, and because we are not able to, you decided to come here. We will take 1 minute of silence to honor our late president. So I request you just to stand, and for online people, we can just take a minute to honor our late president. Okay, thank you. You can take your seats. Today we are here to launch the report, The Hidden Health Impacts of Industrialized Farming System. And Dr. Yamo, our head of farming system, will present the findings of a report that was done over time. And today he will share that report in a short while. That presentation will just take us about 40 minutes or so. And after that, we will have a Q&A session where we request you to write a question. Your question, when Dr. Yamo is presenting, should you have a question, please do write. And for those of us who are online and you have a question, please post it in the chat box on the link there. We'll be able to take those questions. So we'll have Dr. Yamo's presentation, then a Q&A, which will take about 10 minutes. Then we will launch a petition, and we'll be led by our friend and representative from AUIBA, Professor James Wambacha, who give us a short speech and then launch the presentation. And then after that, we'll have a photo session. For those of us who are physical here, you have a photo session. And for the people online, please do put your video on. We will have a photo session at that point in time. For the media teams, both online and offline, we will have a Q&A with Dr. Yamo and the other researchers who are here at the end of the whole session. And B-rolls and press releases will be available shortly after. Of course, there is lunch for those of us attending physically. For those of us online, we will ask you to, I'm sure you have prepared lunch, so we'll ask you to have lunch at home or at your place. Okay, so before Dr. Yamo comes here to do his presentation, let's just do a few housekeeping online. As I have said, if you have Q&A or any suggestions about this broadcast and you are joining us online, please feel free to use the chat room. You can post your chats there or your questions there. If you are physically here, we will ask you to write your question or comment on the paper. That's why the hotel has been gracious enough to give us the papers so you can ask your question there. Our teams will be going around collecting the questions so that we can address them during the Q&A. Today we are using the hashtag. We have a hashtag. The hashtag is Change Lives Forever. Change Lives Forever. Change Lives Forever. That is the hashtag that we're using. Please do follow us on Twitter. We recognize the power of Twitter in creating movements that can change the lives of animals. So please follow us on Twitter. We are at Move the World AF. We are also streaming this online through our Facebook page, and the written recordings will be available immediately after. For those of us who are physically here, we ask you to please put off your phone, your computer, so that you can give the people who are joining online a good experience. Let's also minimize movement from the places we are seated, so that our online audience can get a good feel of what we are presenting. Now to the business of the day. I'm sure most of you are wondering, who is World Animal Protection? Who is World Animal Protection? We have prepared a short clip to show you who we are, and I'll ask the team to play who we are, and after that we'll have a welcome video from Tennyson Williams.
At World Animal Protection, we know that every animal counts. We're a global animal welfare organisation and have been campaigning for over 50 years to end animal cruelty. We work to achieve global change. Every day, billions of animals are experiencing unbearable cruelty. We tackle the root causes of their suffering so that we can make the biggest difference to their lives. We give a voice to the voiceless. Our world is changing fast. As people face urgent issues like the climate emergency and depleting natural resources, we give animals a voice and ensure their needs are met, because we all call our planet home. Right now, we're prioritising issues where change can transform the lives of the greatest number of animals, overhauling the global food system. And ending the cruel exploitation of our planet's wildlife. We know that the fate of animals' lives rests in our hands. Our passionate teams inspire and mobilise individuals and organisations to create change. We support local and global movements that are fighting for a better future for animals. Our knowledge and expertise give us a powerful voice at the most influential levels of government and business, where we establish animal welfare as a global priority and a local concern. Though the challenge is great, our determination is greater.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. My apologies, I'm not able to join you at today's launch event, but nonetheless, I have made it incumbent on me to be able to speak to you, because this is very important for us as World Animal Protection. As you know, we value your partnership, we value the collaboration that exists between us, because without which we believe we are not able to deliver against our targets that we have set to make the world a better place for animals. You will recall, as some of you know, that in March this year, we launched our new global strategy titled A New World for Animals, which will guide the work that we are going to be doing for the next 10 years. This decision has come because we believe this is where we can make the biggest impact for all animals around the world when it comes to the scale and suffering that animals experience around the world. In this new strategy, we have two clear goals. The first one is that we will ensure that farm animals live a good life by transforming the global food system. This is very important. Working with all stakeholders that have a role to play within the global food systems requires of us to bring a very significant change in the lives of farmed animals. The second goal is that we will stop the cruelty and suffering that wildlife experience because they are being treated as commodities, and therefore all activities, be they deliberate or not, that result in the suffering of wild animals, we will ensure that we bring them to a stop so that we can give wild animals a good life. So for today's event, we are launching a report that is titled The Hidden Health Impacts of Industrial Livestock Systems. This is because we want to bring to life, to the attention of the entire world, that indeed what happens behind the scenes in a lot of the industrial systems where livestock is being farmed is resulting in suffering of a lot of animals, but also has serious health implications. I will not go into the details of the findings of that report. My colleague Dr. Yamo will be doing justice to that, but mine is to highlight that this is happening at a time when we have been able to agree as an organization where we will focus over the next 10 years. And as I've said already, we'll be focusing on farmed animals in relation to the global food system and how we intend to disrupt those systems insofar as the way they continue to cause harm, to cause suffering, and mete out cruelty to animals. So for this report, all I will highlight is that we are aiming to achieve two main objectives. We need to raise awareness about the hidden health impacts of factory farming, which help to enhance public opposition to factory farming and support for a moratorium. The moratorium, ladies and gentlemen, that we are seeking for is to make sure that no new factory farms emerge in Africa. We are conscious that Africa is one of those continents that will need a lot of food to feed its population, but there are other measures through which we can achieve that without necessarily establishing new factory farms. So the moratorium we are calling for through the findings of this report, by which we hope to raise awareness, is to make sure that no new factory farms emerge on the continent of Africa. Number two, we want to inspire the public to call for an end to factory farming and a more humane and sustainable food system to be put in place. Because as evident from this report, and as Dr. Amo will be speaking to the details of the findings of this research, you will find out that indeed there are a lot of health implications which are hidden, which are not known to the general public, that is associated with factory farming. So I want to encourage you, our stakeholders, our partners, to pay attention to the highlights of this report insofar as the findings are concerned, and join us in taking action to make sure that no new factory farms emerge on the continent, and therefore ensure we provide or give our animals in the food systems across the world, and Africa in particular, a good life which we believe they deserve. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for continuing to collaborate with us. Your partnership is valid. Your continued collaboration is valued, and together we can change the world and make the world a better place for animals. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Yeah, indeed, thank you, Tennyson. That's our message. And you can hear the crying call is let's walk together in this journey. And you are our supporters. So remember to join us on Twitter. Move the world here is our handle. And today we are using Change Lives Forever. That is our hashtag. And at this point, I want to welcome Dr. Victor Yamo, who is our campaigns manager in charge of farming systems in Africa. And I'm sure most of us know Dr. Yamo already. He's not new. I think he's done the most presentations in this topic. He claims or he says that he is a farmer number one. Yeah, after Moy. Yeah, and he is an expertise on chicken. So he will give us the report findings. Thank
you, Lucy. Yeah, thank you very much, Lucy. Let me do the traditional thing of stage fright. I'm trying to organize myself. And I'm also trying to see whether I can see the presentation from that far. But will be good. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Mine is going to be very brief. I am going to just give you a presentation on findings that were collated with a big team that worked across Africa, Europe, and across the world, bringing together research scientists and people who should actually be the ones presenting. But I think I have learned the art of talking the language of Mwananchi and not the scientific language of our research manager, Winde, that they put in research documents. So those are my contacts. I usually say those are that's the most important slide in this presentation, because it gives you a phone number, an email address, and so if you miss anything, and I teach university, so I know old age teaching is difficult, because sometimes you miss certain things. If you miss anything, you can send us an email, you can call us, we will respond, believe you. The next couple of slides are relatively standard ones. The next, they just tell us who world animal protection is. Our vision is a world where animals live free from suffering, and our mission is to remove the world to protect animals. And I think the important thing to say there is that the we is all of us. It's not Lucy and I who work for world animal protection, but each and every one of us, because we are part of protecting animals, the inheritance that we were given by the Creator. Next. And we, for those in Africa, our office is in Nairobi. That is number 8 on that map. And so that's where we work from, but we work across various African countries. For farming specifically, we are in Zambia, in Tanzania, in Uganda, and hopefully we will be moving into 1 or 2 other countries this year now that the COVID-related manuals have come to an end. Yeah, as Tennyson alluded to, we launched a global strategy about a month ago, New World for Animals, and that's where we're deriving the activities that we're doing, which part of it is this webinar today. Next. In a global strategy, again, as Tennyson alluded to, we have 2 strategic visions, 2 goals to be specific. One is to ensure animals live good lives by transforming the global food systems, and I think important, we need to start understanding what is the global food system. Maybe that's a presentation we should do at some point. I know a lot of us know about value chains, but global food systems are a bit bigger. And goal 2 is about stopping wild animals being cruelly exploited as commodities by changing the systems that allow it. And so those are the 2 things that we're looking at. I will not belabor the next slide. It is the strategy, the food system strategy in 1 page. And when you get the slides, you can look through it. And the food systems, we have a focus around 3 main areas. No future for factory farms, where we look at aspects around factory farming, especially what we'll be discussing today, and the detrimental effects that it has on health, environment, etc., etc. The second one is food revolution, where again we talk about the fact that we might globally be consuming too much meat that is then causing things like climate change, and maybe it's time to look at it differently and see whether we can change our processes. And then the last one is fairer finance, where we look at who funds what, and that then drives certain processes around some of these things. The report, as you can see, the hidden health impacts of industrial livestock systems is already there, and that is something that we are ready to share with you. For those who are here, each one of you will leave with a copy of it, and you can read it and make references to it, because it drives that process. As background, the report is prepared by Wild Animal Protection, by Mark Driscoll on behalf of Wild Animal Protection, and Mark Driscoll is the Director for Tasting the Future. The report focuses on domesticated livestock, cattle, pigs, poultry, sheep, goats, and farmed fish, but it also builds on two previous reports that have been done globally. One is Unveiling the Food Health Nexus by IPES, done in 2017, and Food System Delivering Better Health by World Health Organization, which was done last year. And on your right, you can see the report from World Health Organization. But as we talk about industrial farming, livestock systems or farming systems, what are these? And do we really know what they look at? Are they a problem in Africa? Or is it a global problem that we're looking at and trying to generate? So an industrial livestock system essentially is a system in which many animals are raised in highly intensive methods, confined and overcrowded conditions, where sentience of animals is not recognized, with the goal being maximization of profits. And I think that is where we've been, by providing the animal with as little as possible and not considering that it's a sentient being that needs certain processes. The world is slowly recognizing the fact that it's not sustainable. For example, the amount of feeds that we put into animal production systems is massive, and it's leading to environmental destruction because we need to create space to grow soya and maize and corn, etc., etc. So maybe we need to think through that process. The second thing is the chemical use is also very high. And then how do you do waste management? Currently, Wild Animal Protection, in collaboration with Caldo, is looking at wastes that come from intensive production systems in this country, in Kenya, and how then it's disposed, and does it then contaminate the environment with the antibiotic resistant genes? And that is something that we will be talking about later in the year. Industrial livestock systems are also known to be very destructive in terms of the animals. Animals really suffer, and the workers sometimes go through a lot of hardship because they are not geared, as I say, they're geared towards saving costs and making sure that we make profits as much as possible. There are also practices that are beginning to get discussed, things like close confinement. For the people in the egg production systems, you know, the discussions around whether we need battery cage systems or not. How early do we wean piglets, for instance, or dairy animals? Do we wean them too early, then cause problems in the production system? What about the system, the environment that the animal lives in? Is it enriched? And does it have everything that allows the animal to perform or to be as natural as possible? Or is it one of those environments that is barren and doesn't cater for the needs of that animal? Then you do undergo through, certain animals then undergo through painful mutilations, things like teeth clipping, tail docking, debeaking layers for that matter. Is this something that we can do and do it in a humane way? Those are things that we're looking at around industrial and livestock production system. Last but not least is the fact that those systems use animals that grow pretty fast. In fact, in the broiler systems, we're now beginning to discuss a slower growing broiler. Many years ago when I worked for the broiler industry, we were always looking for fast growing broiler, but slowly it has reached a stage where we're looking at a slow growing broiler, and it's beginning to get traction. Essentially, one of the things that then underpins intensive industrial livestock production systems is excessive use of antibiotics. And as an organization, we say there are certain things around antibiotics that we need to be looking at. The amount of antibiotics that goes through production system is simply not acceptable, and a lot of that antibiotics is then used to mask a poor production system, and that is something that we need to look at. The second bit of the presentation is looking at key trends and trends around production systems and why factory farming is coming into equation. First is clearly, I hope most of us know that in this continent, in Africa, we have about 1.21 billion people against a global population of about 7 billion, which gives us about 16 or 17% thereabout. By 2050, it's projected that the African population will have literally doubled to 22.4 billion against a global population of about 9.7 billion, which then converts to about 25%. So by 2050, we'll be constituting a quarter of the population of the world, and that is something that then needs to be addressed. This then drives certain things because we have a growing population, we are converting a lot of our farms into urban centers. There's also a growing middle class, and essentially that then drives demands for animal products. And that then brings what we need to be addressing. We've given you an example there, a graph that shows the global meat production between 1961 and 2018. Over that period of time, we have moved from about 70 million kilos of animals to about 330 billion, or metric tons of animals that we then categorize. You can see in 2018 we consumed about 80 billion animals globally. The heaviest consumption was, of course, chicken, which was about 70 billion, followed by pigs, 1.5 billion. There's always that debate, which is the most consumed animal. You can then do the maths and see which one it is. Then, in terms of that, then the per capita meat consumption has also gone up, and it's something that we are looking at. In Africa, for instance, we're looking at currently doing 14 kilos per person per year, which then translates to about 26 kilos per person per year by 2050. So again, that is something that we need to be addressing and asking ourselves, how and where will we grow these animals, and how will we be managing these animals to ensure that the world, that we feed the population that will be on this continent and planet at that point in time. And that's why we are beginning to start asking ourselves certain questions. For those of us, the Kenyan contingent or the East African contingent on this presentation, just a snapshot, a summary done by one of the media houses that shows some of the things that, as we said, we consume about 14 kilos per person per year, which is on the top left. But globally, the world average is about 86 kilos per person per year. And that then is something that we need to be discussing. And under our food revolution, then we are saying, in the African context, then we need to ensure that we are eating animals that are coming from high welfare production systems that then are sustainable. But from the European perspective, we are saying we then need to reduce the amount of meats that are being consumed. And very interesting discussions are happening around there. So meat consumption, the growth forecast by 2030 is that we'll have about 5.9% increase in growth in beef, about 13% in pork, and 17 or 18% in poultry. And the poultry meat is going to be the biggest consumed meat, representing about 41% by 2030. And meat consumption will grow by about 30% in Africa. And I think that poses a very interesting question for us as Africans. Where will this meat be grown? How will it be grown, and under what production system? And that's why, as World Animal Protection, we decided for the next 10 years to look at production, food systems, for that matter. Our addition to meat is being fueled by failed policies, corporate greed, and unscrupulous marketing campaigns that is causing farm animals to suffer in that process. And this is then driving things like climate change, pollution, environmental contamination, antibiotic resistance, and destroying wild animal habitats, because we are clearly wild animal habitats to grow soya or aspects of things that go into the production system. In terms of climate change, industrial livestock production system contributes to about 26-27% of green gases, human greenhouse gases that we see. And this has a major impact from industrial livestock production system, which then leads to, it's also one of those that produces the largest amount of methane and nitrous oxide, which are part of the greenhouse gases. In terms of land use, you can see the process around there. There's destruction of forests, there's agribusiness that drives it. There are situations that we then need to, and you're basically changing what used to be traditional land use. In this country, for instance, we've had situations where we're moving away from natural wildlife habitats and replacing it with production systems. And that then drives habitat loss for wildlife. But it also brings the animals in close contact with humans, which then brings conflict at certain levels, but also then shares pathogens between the two human and animal species, which then leads to zoonotic diseases being enhanced. It's been a decade of action, and when I joined World Animal Protection in 2015, it was near impossible to talk about animal welfare and production systems. In fact, the classical question was, have we sorted the human problems to then be looking at animal problems? But in 2015, the UN member states then endorsed Agenda 2030, which is around strategic development, sustainable development goals. The 17 of them, the people who do research tell me that all the 17 can be delivered using livestock. So it's important for us as livestock keepers to then see how and what part we are playing around the 17 SDGs, or if you're in the Kenyan context, the Big Four agenda. And then there was a Paris Agreement on climate change that then also took, it came around the same time. In 2017 in Africa, it's good to have Prof here. Through the engagement of Africa Union, we then launched the Animal Welfare Strategy for Africa and the Animal the Animal Platform for Animal Welfare, Africa Platform for Animal Welfare. In 2022, in February, there's something very interesting that happened in Nairobi, Kenya, when we had the UNEA 5.2 resolution that recognizes the nexus between animal welfare, environment, and sustainable development. And for a long time, you can see 10 years, we moved from animal welfare not being very important and critical to where UN bodies are recognizing that there's a nexus between animal welfare, environment, sustainable development, public health, One Health, all that manner of things if you look at UNEA 5.2. What then does drive, this process then leads to certain impacts. And globally there's been discussion around 5 impacts that come through because of poor production systems, factory farming for that matter. And so the 5 integrated pathways include unhealthy diets and food insecurity, zoonotic pathogens and antimicrobial resistance are on the increase. There's unsafe and adulterated foods. Then there's environmental contamination and degradation and occupational hazards. I will briefly try to talk through each one of them. For details, you can read the report. In terms of malnutrition and obesity, the most important thing that we then look at around that is one, the number of people that are having challenges with their nutrition is on the increase. The diseases that are around poor nutrition are on the increase. You can see it costs us about $676.6 million to sort out some of these things, and that then becomes a critical thing that we're looking at. There's about USD 2.2 trillion that is the cost of that poor welfare in terms of what comes out in terms of poor nutrition and malnutrition, treating people who are obese. And it's not something that we can say is a foreign or a European problem. It's a problem that is already being seen on this continent, and it's something that needs to be addressed urgently. If you look at the data that is being provided in that report, you'll find that places like Southern Africa, places like West Africa are already having a significant number of people who are already having matters relating to obesity, overweight, and challenges around some of these things, which then lead to other disease conditions like high blood pressure for that matter. The next one is zoonotic pathogens and the AMR, and I think that is one that the organization has been working around for a while. We've had several such pieces. Of course, things around supermarket meat testing. We are now doing environmental water testing. I think the important thing around disease risk and superbugs is that poor welfare, and that is something that OIE, the tripartite, recognized at the beginning of looking at AMR, that poor welfare is something that needs to be addressed if you are going to reduce antibiotic utilization in production systems. It is estimated that 73% of antibiotics that are produced globally end up in production systems. And as an organization, we are saying around 40 to 80% of that antibiotic is not necessary, especially in the African context, where farmers are able to get antibiotics and use them instead of doing the proper things around good hygiene, good sanitation, good biosecurity, and good animal husbandry. And it's something that we then need to engage as professionals, our farmers around them, teach them to ensure that they drive that process. In a report that was released late last year, one of the highlights of the fact that poor and AMR is actually a bigger problem in Sub-Saharan Africa than the rest of the world. So we need to come together and see how we drive and manage that process. There are drivers around that process, things that then drive antibiotic resistance, which include things like poor welfare at certain levels, deforestation at certain levels, which is important and critical, and that's why there's that connection. And you hear people talking about the nexus between some of these things to ensure that they are looked at critically and they're addressed as we go along. There are also things about antimicrobial resources, where we are looking at how we manage some of these antimicrobials. Are we following the laws of the land? In a country like this one, where we say antibiotics are reserve drugs, how comes then farmers are able to get drugs that are of critical importance for human health and use them for production systems? We're also looking at things like climate change that is driving changes in antibiotic genetic makeup of antibiotics or some of the pathogens that we look at, and those are things that are critical and important. In fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic 2 or 3 years back, ILRI and UNEP then came together and did a research piece that talks about the preventing the next pandemic, zoonotic disease, and how to break the chain. And one of the things that came out of that report is the fact that in the last since 1940 to now, almost 50%, close to 50% of the diseases that have post-pandemics are actually conditions that come from production systems. Things like SARS, Ebola, avian influenza, swine flu are all driven from intensive farming systems. And that's the reason why we then say as an organization that we need to work in partnership addressing some of these issues, especially around things like avian influenza and swine flu. Remember that even in the midst of the pandemic, one of the things that came out very clearly was that the next big pandemic is already with us, because we begin to talk about a swine flu that is already resistant at certain levels in China. But for us, the bigger pandemic that we're even looking at is the AMR, the antimicrobial resistance itself. And you can see in that slide, it quickly highlights the fact that today we talk about 700,000 people are dying annually because they contract diseases that cannot be treated. However, the reality is that in the report that was released late last year, the figure has actually moved from 700,000 to about 1.24 million people dying annually from infections that cannot be treated with any non-antibiotics. It means then that we need to look at certain things. At certain levels, at the human level, we need to look at how we manage antibiotics. But part of the problem is coming from the animal side, and that means that we then need to drive that process, ensure that the production system doesn't use a lot of antibiotics. It is good to see organizations in this country or producers in this country beginning to make commitments on responsible use of antibiotics. We see countries are developing national action plans around use of antibiotics, and those are the critical things that we need to look at. It's estimated by 2050, if we don't do anything, we'll be losing about 10 million people annually, and that is something that is important and critical. In terms of safe food, the reality is that we need to ensure that at any one point that, in fact, in the Kenyan Constitution, if I start from there, the population has a right to access to wholesome food. Wholesome food means that it has got no antibiotics, it has no chemicals, it has got nothing, no microorganisms that are detrimental to the consumer. And so there has been a lot of work around pesticides, the amount of pesticide that goes into production systems, around amount of chemicals that goes into production systems that ends up in what ends on your table in terms of things like meat, milk, eggs, etc. One of the things that we look at critically is actually antibiotics itself, because that's one of the things that is targeted, and there's a lot of research data that has been done by good research institutions around that. I think the important thing around there is that then you need to look at it from the microbiological point of view, where we are having organisms contaminating food, which then end up causing foodborne diseases. In fact, it is estimated that about 600 million foodborne disease illness and about 450,000 deaths occurred in 2010, and the number is rising. So you can see there are certain things that we need to be looking at around food production and food-related issues to ensure that our foods are safe. And just a good estimate to just then give you some figures to grapple with. Malaria, sometime back, malaria cost about 400,000 deaths. And you will spend about $2.7 billion to manage malaria. But foodborne illnesses cost kill about 475,000 people and costed us about $40 billion to manage. So you can see certain things are beginning to drive that process. And again, as I said earlier on, Africa is one of those places that we're looking at, because that's where the challenges are in terms of foodborne illness and foodborne conditions that we need to look at. The conditions are costing the poorer countries about $110 billion annually to just look at, to manage, and that is something that we need to be very critical about. I've just given an example there of non-typhoidal salmonella mortalities across the globe a year or two back, and you can see the heaviest concentration of those disease conditions was actually in Africa. The yellowish are the less ones, where you start seeing red and a darker version of red, then you see that there's a problem around there. Then we talk about environmental contamination, and we are saying that production systems are contaminating the environment because of things around the waste products that come out of production systems. When you go to a pig farm or a chicken farm, where does manure go to? If that manure is then being used like it happens in most of the African countries to grow crops, anything that has been a problem in a chicken or poultry house, or poultry or pig house, then ends up contaminating the environment. And I know when we talk about, like when we launched the supermarket meat testing about a year ago, a lot of us then said we'll eat vegetables, but if the vegetable is already being grown by manure that is coming from contaminated chicken houses, then the reality is that you're ending up with two things. One, you're ending up with vegetables that are already contaminated with antibiotic residues or chemicals that have been used in that production system, but you're also ending up with vegetables that are contaminated with antibiotic-resistant genes that then can be transmitted through the food into human population. So that's one of those things that are critical, and that's why we then talk about a One Health approach to management of some of these conditions. In terms of occupational hazard, the reality is that intensive farming systems then also has very poor management processes or enumeration for the workers that work around some of these conditions. And so it's not only about the animal, it extends to the workers in those production systems, and that's why we are now talking to organizations or producers or corporates that are part of that process, the food systems, to ensure that they are not only looking at the welfare of the animal, but they're also looking at the welfare of the workers. It's estimated that almost 40% or higher of those production systems are very poor working conditions. To then conclude, we then start looking at what are we saying, which shifts are we looking at, and what needs to happen differently. It's not just about saying that this is what we found, but it's also then about suggesting solutions and beginning to say we need to shift certain things. There are about 9 or 10 of them. I will highlight some of them. The rest you can read from the document that you will be getting from the actual report. The first is a shift of mindsets. And in terms of mindsets, we are saying that we need to recognize that planetary health and high animal welfare are integral parts. They're literally the two sides of the same coin. And so it's important to ensure that anything relating to human health, human well-being, and wellness is quickly connected to how we handle animals. In fact, just remember that a great man called Mahatma Gandhi said that you can know the greatness, you can see the greatness of a nation by how they treat animals. There's also a shift to determine true cost and pricing. Globally, we know that there are certain subsidies that are given around production systems that then makes production cheaper, and that is critical and important. A shift also to transition, and I think I alluded to this when we were talking about the 3 cluster areas that we look at. And in terms of that, we are then saying we need to start looking at 2 things. In the African context, we still need to eat more meat because 14 kilos is too low, but we should ensure that that meat comes from high welfare production systems, and we've given examples there. But for the developed world where the consumption is too high, it's about seeing how we reduce that consumption of meat, and I think there are discussions already around that. We also need to shift to sustainable and healthy diets because of the impact that poor diets end up having in our systems. We also need to shift the power, and what we're talking about power, and that's part of the reason we are talking about relaunching a petition today, is getting people to understand that they have the power to influence corporates to do things differently. By one, if you know that a certain corporate that you get your food from is not doing the right thing in terms of animal welfare, and there are risks that you're being exposed to, then you can make a buying decision and you move your cash elsewhere. And when you do CAP surveys across this country and across the continent, the last one we did across 8 countries, people keep saying that they're willing to spend slightly more money to ensure that they have a high welfare production system that is sensitive to the needs of the animal, but also sensitive to food safety and antibiotic use. We also need to shift in trade, and we need to shift the trade policy to reflect the true health, social and environment costs around industrial livestock systems. And currently we are actively doing a survey or a research working around finance institutions. What are they funding? Do they have ESG policies that are driving that agenda? If they have environmental, social, or governance policy that mitigate or go against high welfare production system, then it's an opportunity to talk about it and to start driving that process around something we call farms. So it's not just about talking to producers, we're also talking to the financials to these producers to ensure that the production system is a high welfare production system. There's need to shift to regenerative and agroecological systems. I don't need to emphasize that because the reality is we need to go back to what works and is sensitive to the environment. Then a shift to high animal welfare production systems with the good welfare standards that caters for the 5 fundamental freedoms, because that then drives better production systems. And around this, certain global animal welfare organizations have developed something called FARMS, simply meaning Farm Animal Responsible Minimum Standards that then addresses certain things around animal welfare. Then a shift to one health and one welfare, and I think it's good to recognize the fact that one health and one welfare then drives the process to ensure that we are not working in silos as individual experts, but we are working across and integrated in an integrated way so that issues that are coming from animal health or animal welfare that has an impact in production, in human health, then are dealt with. To conclude, then there are recommendations, and I will highlight 4 of them because there are about 10 recommendations. Remember, it's a global report, so we are not saying everything in that report must apply to Africa. So there are 4 critical ones that we are recommending, and we want African governments or African policy makers to look at. Number 1 is governments must recognize the interconnected public health planetary impact of industrialized farming systems and commit to stopping the support of factory farming systems. And it goes back to what UNEA 5.2 talks about, the interconnection, the nexus between animal welfare, environment, and public health, and how we drive that process around the One Health sort of thing. We also think we need to establish national plans to support a just transition away from industrialized livestock production towards agroecological systems that produce sustainable plant-based foods and fewer farmed animals in high welfare production systems. Very important. The last two is we need to build farms, and farms I told you is farm animal responsible minimum standards, which is requirements for production and procurement as a minimum. And so it's not just about producers, we're also talking to the retail sector, to the fast food restaurants, to ensure that whatever they're purchasing meets a certain minimum standard, which we are recommending known as farms. We also say we need to commit to a moratorium on factory farming with national climate action plans, which are known as nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. I know if I asked Africans whether you know about some of those things, you might look at me strangely, but interestingly, for Kenyans, that was actually done in 2017. We have an NDC that we need to be looking at and addressing, and I think part of this engagement is to sensitize you to look at it and ensure that it's delivering and it's being delivered, not one of those things that are on the shelves. Lastly, we need to develop national One Health, One Welfare action plans and national AMR plans that recognize the health impacts of industrialized livestock and restricted growth. And I have just highlighted on the same slide, shown you the cover of the Kenyan one, the One Health strategy that was launched earlier this year. So these things are being developed, but I think for us, the important thing is to let you be aware that these things need to be developed and implemented. And part of being good, responsible citizens is to hold your leadership accountable to implement some of these things. Not just to produce them, but to ensure that they're implemented. In conclusion, we're saying that today we want to call you to action. And calling you to action means that you need to take certain action. And I think I will allow Lucy to come back and we'll be explaining at some point what this call to action is about. But you, as I said earlier on when we started, it's not about we, it's not about Lucy and myself, it's about all of us. Each one of us can individually take action to ask our governments to impose a moratorium on factory farms and introduce high welfare production systems that then are sustainable and drive certain processes. Thank you.
I think Dr. Yamo deserves a better anchor, so please let's clap for him. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yamo, for the very insightful presentation. I will ask you to stand right here because we are now moving to Q&A, which will be facilitated by Dr. Mwinde. And please, if you have any question, I will ask you to just jot it down on paper. We'll move around picking the questions. And for our online audience, please do type your questions on the chat box. We will address those questions. We'll pick them from online, and Dr. Yamo is ready for you to answer all those questions. And we also have a couple of researchers who we might call from time to time to assist with the answers. So let's do Q&A. Over to you, Dr. Mwinde.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Victor Yamo, for that presentation. Lucy, before we go to Q&A, I'd like to recognize two key people who have joined us, Dr. Jen from DBS, Karibu Sana, and Patrick from OIE. We appreciate your presence here today. There's a request to note down questions on papers. If you have done so, just raise your hand, then I'll come by to pick that. And again, I'll ask Ian to note down questions which are coming from online participants. To start with Victor, which country with high rate of consumption, which country has high rate of consumption of animal products? That's a question. That should be your first question. I know you did touch some information on the same, but if you can give comments to that, Africa perspective and internationally, that should be good. More questions as Victor thinks about that one, or any reactions? The floor is quite open for us who are here at the moment. If you are not necessarily to be a question, but you have a comment about what has been presented.
When we supported AU to develop the African Animal Welfare Strategy, we did not come to Africa and say, here's a strategy every country must apply. We said, let's take time and work with the national governments to ensure that it's then delivered. So each strategy that has come, or each national animal welfare strategy that has been ratified looks different because it depends on the nationals who decide how they're going to do that. So it's something that you're saying, and if you look at that report, you also say there are things that we need to learn from pastoralists. There are things we need to learn from small-scale farmers. How then we mitigate so that the small-scale farmers can come together and form a significant group that then can drive that process. And that is part of the reason why this year, for instance, the organization is looking at the knowledge, attitudes, and practices around small-scale farming. Because for Africa and for the Asian subcontinent, 80% of production comes from small-scale farming. So that's something that we're willing to have a discussion with and to work with anybody who's interested. As we say, we work in partnership. So if you think you have an idea and you can leverage around it, please talk to us. Thank you, Dr. Chuguna, for that question. And I think part of it has already answered. We recognize, and I said earlier on that things are shifting. And I think the challenge with Africa is that we're stuck in one position and we are not recognizing that there are shifts. And I gave you a good example. When I worked for the poultry industry, everybody was looking for a fast-growing chicken. But now internationally, everybody is looking for a slow-growing chicken. Maybe the people I worked for were a bit intelligent or saw the future very far ahead because they then started producing slow-growing chickens alongside the traditional fast-growing broilers. And that is something that we then need to discuss. As the world shifts, are we in Africa ready? If tomorrow, okay, let me use a classical one that I know Adhiambo would want me to talk about. When you talk about battery cage systems, as the world is saying by 2030 you don't want battery cage systems, are we in Africa responding to that, or are we saying, no, it's all about production? Then you remember I said one of the shifts then needs to be around trade. If supermarkets are beginning to say on the African continent that they are not going to accept eggs by 2030 that is coming from battery cage systems, what are we doing as professionals to drive that agenda so that we are not locked out of high-value markets that are sitting in the same places that we are in? And I think that's the challenge that we're posing as an organization. As we look at shifts in diets, shifts in fashion, shifts in everything, how are we then relating that to our farmers? Yeah, our farmers are aware that the world is no longer going that way. And that's why as an organization, we also say, let's track the money. When I worked for a certain bank, we were the ones who were funding that production system that is battery cage. So that's the reason why we talk to banks and say, this is a high, in fact, farms was never produced for, the farm animal responsible minimum standard was not produced for producers. It was produced for banks, financial institutions to understand what commitments they need to make around some of these things. So it's a holistic approach, and we want all of you, and that's why I keep saying, it's not about World Animal Protection or ILRI or University of Nairobi, it's about collaboratively working together to ensure that we then deliver some of these things for the sustainability and the benefit of future generations. Some of us might not be around in 2050, but we need to give key points that people can drive their information or process. Back to you.
Thank you, Daktari, for that. In case you have more clarification to those questions, there will be time to interact with Daktari to explain further. And I have 3 questions from those who are with us online. First is from Maurice Kishangi. I hope you can hear us. It is like this. High cost of feeds is one of the factors leading to factory production to maximize the profits. High cost of feeds is one of the factors leading to factory production to maximize the profits. Do you have a plan or a solution towards maybe tackling the high cost of feeds specifically in Kenya? The second one is from Kelvin Ogone. Is it factory farming the solution to the perennial food shortage, especially in the Horn of Africa? Right now, close to 3 million people are facing hunger as a result of drought that our region experienced. Is it not investing in factory farming a solution to this? Then last one from Nick Bo. Rather than stopping factory farming, how are we to create awareness among consumers such that they demand for properly raised animal sourced food? Then he gives a comment that farm accreditation will also be useful. Those 3 questions are from our online participants. So Daktari, you can respond to that. Then I'll take the second and final round of questions so that we can move to the next step. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mwinde. Thank you for the online participants for those 2 questions. For Gishange, high cost of feeds is one of the factors that is driving maximization of profits. But the reality is, and I think maybe you missed the earlier part of my presentation, in the high cost of feeds is also driving some other processes that then talk about what Kevin is talking about. You are trying to produce feeds in spaces that are no longer there. And the classical one that I give is in a county next to us. When I was a young man and working for the poultry industry, everybody used to grow chickens. In 2017 or 2018, when we went to that county, they are all converting those houses, those chicken farms into housing. Agenda number 4. Those are big 4 agenda issues. That is something that we need to look at. And when you're doing that, you are then causing pressure on agricultural land because you're losing agricultural land. And that then drives a totally different narrative that we need to be looking at. Yes, I agree again that high costs is leading to that maximization of profits. But maybe the question, and I also explained that during food revolution, should we then be talking about producing a lot of maize and soya to feed chickens, which we then eat, or maybe then we should be talking about taking the soya and eating it? And that is a new thought processes around food revolution. Do we need to, if you do the maths for those who do animal production, how many kilos of corn and soya do you need to produce a kilo of meat? Isn't it easier then to even mitigate against drought, to use that as food? In fact, in my life, when I worked for the poultry industry, I've never heard of a strategic reserve around meat. It's always around maize and grain. Yeah? And that's something that we then need to look at. And maybe that's the balance that we need to be looking at around. Kevin asks a good question about factory farming being the solution. But factory farming is also driving climate change and causing the droughts that we're talking about. So we look like we're chasing our tails in this process. So one of the things we are recommending as an organization is that because of the connection between factory farming and climate change, and that's why there is a lot of discussion around COP27. I would encourage Kevin to follow COP27 discussions around, which will be happening in Egypt sometime in November. Because then you'll start understanding that these things are not in isolation. What you do in factory farms drives antibiotic use, which then causes health problems. What you use in factory farms drives deforestation because you're trying to grow more maize and you're clearing forests for that matter, which then drives climate change. So maybe then we need to stop that process so that we then don't have droughts and we have sufficient food. So it's something that policymakers need to discuss, and some of us need to be involved and bring our expertise so that we are able to address some of those things. I agree with Nick Board that it's about creating awareness, and that's why as an organization we do all these media engagements, we do all these webinars. This webinar is not restricted to technical people only. We invite consumer organizations, we talk to the press, because you're using all manner of ways to drive that process so that people understand that when I go to a supermarket or to a retail outlet and buy meat, what is behind that meat? What are the costs all factors in that meat? Is it cheap because we are cutting corners, then creating other problems, which then become too expensive for us to manage. I think you've done very well to respond to consumption rate in Kenya. I think one of the things Kenyans are learning, they keep saying that they are meat eaters, they are carnivores, but that I told that you're not carnivores. The people eat more meat elsewhere. So that is critical. Besides antibiotics used in livestock, is there alternatives? Yes, there's a lot of alternatives. In fact, in my experience working in the poultry industry, you can grow chickens without antibiotics. And in fact, you make more money that way than when you pump them with antibiotics. Yeah? Alternatives include things like good biosecurity to ensure that the animals are not getting exposed by having proper fencing, good housing, ensuring that your house is rat-proof. That's one way. Hygiene and sanitation is another one that we need to look at. And hygiene and sanitation is about, I think Kenyans have learned this thing now. The world has learned this thing, washing your hands, ensuring that everything that you utilize is clean and washed well. And the house, I think our challenges are around housing. How do you wash the house, clean down, disinfection, how do you ensure that there's a footpath? All those things are critical, and when they are done properly, they lead to less cost of production with a better product at the end of the day. Under the National Action Plan, we have developed guidelines for prudent use of antibiotics in production systems that we need to then look at as farmers to ensure that these things are done properly. Then beyond that, there is also vaccinations. A lot of diseases in production systems are about good vaccination. It's also about how you feed the animal, good husbandry, proper feeding, proper good feed for the right age, ensuring that the animal has good, clean water. In fact, the rule of thumb is that water must be water that you can drink. I liked the launch the other day of Kenchi where they were talking about if they can't drink the water, they don't put it into their production system. Those are some of the alternatives that we need to be looking at, David. The role of consumers, I think I have made a lot of, let me repeat myself. It is you as the consumer who makes a buying decision. If you support poor welfare, you end up with a poor quality product that then ends up having negative impacts on your health. So you need to make good buying decisions, and that's why organizations like us, working with the research institutions around us, and bring you information around antibiotic use that is critical and important, or production systems that are critical and important, so that then you can make good buying decisions as a consumer. Samuel, I agree with you 100%. The reason Kenyans rejected the bill that wanted to stop us using manure as fertilizer is because we did not understand the science behind the bill. We were playing politics as a country, but the reality is that we need to start asking ourselves hard questions around some of these things. If the farmer is using antibiotics and you're putting it into your production, into your crop production system, you're already contaminating the environment. That's why we talk about a One Health approach. I hope that at some point we'll have a discussion on how we manage some of these things. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, for responding to those questions. I understand we have more coming online, but I request we end it here because of time. Maybe I will ask you put your email against your question and to be able to respond to them after this event. But we really appreciate those questions. Phil, we are not cutting you short. It's for the essence of time, limited time that you have. Now from here, we are going to move to the next phase, and I will ask Lucy, this one she's going to help us go through the next two activities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amo and Mwinde, for that. Please let's give a round of applause for Dr. Amo, who has given justice to those questions. And very good presentation. The presentation will be available on for the press who are here, and also the entire webinar will be available also on our YouTube page after this. So for our online audience, if you have any question, you can please put it in the chat as we wind up. We'll be able to attend to those and we'll send an answer and the presentation to you as well. So you have all the answers. So keep those questions coming through our online platform. Yeah, we now move on to the next session, which is really the launch of the petition. And at some point, somebody asked me what's the petition about. And because we have the Daktaris here, as we launch that, I will ask Dr. Yamo to explain to us what it's all about, but that is coming. So Dr. Yamo, please prepare yourself to explain to us what a moratorium is for the pedestrians. All right, we now shift to the second and final session of this presentation, which at this juncture I wish to welcome Professor James Wambacha, who kindly agreed to be with us in this event and to be our chief guest. He will give his remarks, just about 5 minutes remarks, and I will request him to then introduce the PDS so that she can give her remarks, Dr. Jane Njuguna, and then we'll give on to launch of the petition. Dr. Wambacha, Professor Wambacha, please.
Thank you. Colleagues, let me first recognize partners that are in the room and appreciate the World Animal Protection for partnering with the African Union, Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources. I also recognize colleagues from UAE, from FAO, who are very good partners in developing the animal resource in the continent. I recognize colleagues from IRI, our research partners, and we work very closely with them. You can hear me now. I also recognize the DVS represented by Dr. Njuguna, colleagues from the media, colleagues from different organizations who are our partners in development of the animal resources sector in the continent. I may not take 5 minutes, maybe less. My name is Professor Wambacha. I'm representing the acting director of AUIVA, Dr. Nick Mwamba, who is not able to be with you this morning. He is in Addis Ababa, and he therefore requested me to come and represent him in this particular function. AUIVA, as most of us may be aware, we are a technical office of the African Union Commission, and our business is to support the development of livestock or animal resources in our continent. And we do so by supporting coordination efforts, harmonization efforts, and building the capacity of the member states and regional economic communities. So we are pleased to join the World Animal Protection this morning in launching this very important report, which we recognize is contributing to already growing knowledge in this particular area. And really, we are pleased to be part of this, given our mandate in the continent to support the contextualization of what is in this document. I really enjoyed questions coming from colleagues in several aspects of this report, but we do recognize it's a global report, and as Africans, we also need to shift the mindset and contextualize the issues herein to our situation. I think this is very important, and as Dr. Yamo has indicated, we are learning from lessons from other places who have experienced the negative impact of industrial livestock production. We, as we move our animal resources sector, our livestock production sector forward, we need to learn from their experiences so that we do not make the same mistakes. Yes, we have our challenges. Challenges of poverty, challenges of hunger, challenges of malnutrition. Yes, we need animal source foods. But the question is, how and where do we grow these animals? We are not saying we'll do without animals. Our people need that protein, that animal source protein. But how we do it then, we have to learn from others, the pitfalls they have experienced, and then we see as Africa then, how do we move our animal resources sector forward, not making the same mistakes others have made. As I conclude, from where I stand and from where we stand as AUIPA, we see animal resources or livestock as a solution to the issues we are facing. It is a solution. It will contribute to regenerative agriculture, if you like. It will contribute to feeding, providing the essential proteins to our people. So let us look at livestock as a solution, but how we grow it, where we grow it, I think this is the answer. As a continent, we need to contribute to the targets, the global targets for climate change. But as a continent, how do we contribute this? Because we have our unique challenges in feeding our populations. So the big questions as we leave this room is then how do we adapt this report to suit our circumstances and knowing where the world is going. So without much, I would once again like to thank the World Animal Protection for inviting us and really for bringing this information to light so that we are then able to contextualize this and move our animal resources sector forward. So with those few remarks, I'm pleased then to invite the representative of the Director of Veterinary Services Kenya, Dr. Chuguna, to address us. Dr. Chuguna, welcome.
Our chief guest, Professor Obacha, government partners, representative of various universities and various research institutions, animal welfare institutions, members of the press, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be in this occasion where we are launching the reports on the issue of industrial livestock systems. And I want to appreciate World Animal Protection because they have become the leaders in advocating for animal welfare. The fact that animals, they feel pain, they have emotions. That's why you see when you walk around and you have a puppy, it keeps running after you. It even protects you and protects even your family. As the government of Kenya, it is our mandate to implement all the 5 freedoms all the 5 animal freedoms as envisaged in the OIE code. And one thing that is very important is that the population that we have, we find that we need to create awareness. That's why I'm pleased to have the members of the press here. Because the problem is not that they don't want to act, but they are not aware. They don't know. So I would request that all the animal welfare institutions, we join together and create awareness to all the public, both the consumers, the general public, and even the producers, the consumers, and even the whole of the value chain. The small-scale farmers, we find that because of poverty, we need to teach them on the best methods. We need to teach them on biosecurity. We need to teach them on how to care for these animals, so that the product that they will produce will be of high quality. Recently, we launched the food safety, national food safety policy, which will be implemented. We also have the National Animal Welfare Protection Bill, which we are waiting for it to be discussed in Parliament so that we can have a law to implement. When we have a law, you find that since it has some punishments if you don't do ABCD, it will be easy to implement it. We needed to review the law because the one we had was very lenient. So now this one, I'm sure, is going to help us to take care of these animals. We also have the animal antimicrobial resistance policy in an action plan, which are actually due for review. And I hope when we call our development partners, you are going to come and assist us in reviewing the action plan, the policy, and the communication plan. But one thing I want to challenge the research institutions. Somebody asked a question, don't we have an alternative for the antibiotics that we use? Research institutions here and the universities. There is this concept of ethnoveterinary medicine. You find that there is a lot of untapped indigenous knowledge, which I think will be of help to us and also to the farmers. As much as we are saying the issue of biosecurity, animal welfare, environment, cleanliness, it's also good to exploit that line so that we can give an alternative to our farmers. The issue of the cost of feeds. The last time we were in another meeting, the CAS said that, our CAS said that they have allowed the importation of yellow maize so that we can reduce the cost of feeds, because actually it is pushing animal products cost upwards. So, as we launch this report, it's my hope that we are not going just to launch documents, we are going to implement them. And one thing, or the best way to implement, is to create awareness.